So through absolute sheer luck, I met someone who bought this, and for whatever reason, he didn't like it, and he ended up gifting it to me. I did a ton of research, watched a bunch of videos, and learned as much as I could about them, just to have a general idea of what I was going to get into. And I was super excited to get my hands on it because pretty much everyone said that they're really, really good systems. I just got it. I did remove the stock, but I haven't done anything else to it. It's completely stock as it was given to me. For those who don't know or who didn't watch the video I did on my main MWS, I picked up Archway parts for it. So all the parts that were in that Guns Modify MWS are going to go in here if I don't like the way this feels. But initial impressions, to be completely honest, not what I was expecting. First of all, the bolt cover won't stay closed. So I don't know if this is a factory error or if someone broke something in there, but that's how I received it. Second of all, whenever the bolt goes home, it doesn't go all the way forward. And you can tell by this little bit of play that there is in the charging handle. And I'll show you what I mean. So that happens every single time. That little bit of play remains. So I'm not really sure why that would be. I don't know if that'll be an issue. I guess I'll figure it out, but we'll see when I get there. Another thing I don't really like is that this seems to snag for some reason, and I'm hoping it'll break in over time. That's more of a personal thing. Like, it's such a minor thing that it's really not important, but it is one of those things that kind of bugs me. And the trigger, there is a little bit of pickup. My other two MWS triggers don't have this pre-travel. The brake is decent. I don't know that I'll be able to do a proper trigger reset because, again, I'm holding my phone with one hand, but it feels decent. But I do feel that there is room for improvement. One of the other things that I do know, because I tried this almost as soon as I picked it up, was that the bolt doesn't really lock to the rear properly for some reason. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. This thing doesn't release it. It's supposed to be an ambi release. You have to really put some effort into it. Come on. So hopefully the spare parts that I have from my old MWS are going to come in handy to make that just feel a little bit better. That's pretty much all the negatives. The positives, so far, there's really only one, and that's that the receivers are amazing. There is zero play in the receivers. They feel really good. It's a solid weight. I tend to like my guns a little bit heavier, and this feels really good to hold. So the receivers are phenomenal. One thing to keep in mind, and I don't know if this is every single one of them or just this one, this rear pin is not only extremely hard to punch out, but once you do, getting the receivers to separate is really difficult. 10 out of 10 for the externals. Not so impressed with the internals. Okay, so I currently do have the green buffer installed. This is what comes in the Ghetto Blaster stock. And now, when I rack it, that movement is completely gone. That little bit of space that was left there, I don't know how to describe it better. But with the green buffer in here, it goes all the way forward. Now, this is a Ghetto Blaster, as you can see here, right? And you can see the rails here where the PDW stock goes. This did not come with the PDW stock. I don't know if the person who bought it wanted the PDW stock or if he wanted it like this, but I didn't get the PDW stock, which I'm completely okay with because then that means that I wouldn't be able to use some of the parts that I want. And the setup that I want to put in here, I know for sure will remove bolt mounts. And that's the reason that I don't mind that this didn't come with the PDW stock. One thing I just noticed about the bolt is that it has this flat end, which I'm assuming is meant to interact with. Let's see if I can get a picture of it there. That little stud right here, right there. That little stud is what keeps the stock, whatever this thing is called, this buffer weight that comes in it for the Ghetto Blaster. It's kept in place with this little stud right here. So I'm assuming if the bolt end doesn't have this flat section here, it'll probably scrape on that stud and be damaged. So something to keep in mind. I'm assuming that this has been hit before as well. As you can see, there's a little bit of wear marks on here. So here's the trigger boxes. This bottom one is the one that comes in the Noveske. This top one is the one that came out of my GMWS. I was going to keep this as is and just drop it in. However, you'll notice that the one for the Noveske has a little hole right here above where the mag release goes. And that little hole holds this pin here, which is how the ambi works. So, since the gearboxes look to be mostly identical, trigger boxes seem to be mostly identical, and I did put this in. It was a tight fit, but it did fit. What I think I'm going to do instead is take all of the pieces out of this and put them in this, and then drop this into the receiver. There are some small differences, the most noticeable one being this piece right here. I don't know what this is. The GM trigger box doesn't have it. It works the way it is, so I'm assuming that if I just take everything that's in here and drop it into this, it should be fine, but we'll find out. So the trigger boxes are taken apart. Couple key differences here is the valve knocker. This is the one that comes in the MWS. This is the one, I'm sorry, in the Ghetto Blaster. This is the one that comes in the GM. You can see this has a cutout. That cutout is intended for the ambi bolt release to go through. The pin that goes through the trigger box, it falls under this piece. That's what that notch is for. So if you do this, you're gonna have to keep that. That's proprietary to the trigger box. Everything else looks pretty much identical. So before I close this up, I figured I'd do a real quick rundown of what all is going to go back in, stay in, or be changed in this thing. And I know there's a lot of people out there who've been using the Noveske and they absolutely love it, and they would say, you know, none of this requires anything to be changed. But from what I experienced when I played with it as it was given to me, it was super grainy. Like the feel, it wasn't smooth at all. The bolt would get stuck. The nozzle wouldn't load BBs. It had a couple of issues that I didn't really like. And after all of the experimentation that I've been doing, I feel like I finally got a setup that works really well for what I want my MWSs to feel like. So I guess I'll start with the lower. Obviously, externally, I changed the stock. That's just cosmetic. It doesn't really do anything. I mentioned that there's a little stud right here that needs to get ground down. If you want to replace the buffer like I did, this is the thin PTS mech washer that goes inside the buffer. PTS mech buffer, standard MWS spring. I will be getting a 130 at some point because this does have a little bit of bolt bounce. That's going to stay. The bolt is the Noveske bolt. However, this has a unicorn nozzle and a Feta end pass inside. The bolt end came off of the Archwick. It's the heaviest one that I have. So I put that one on there, but you can see that it's scraped up here. That's from that little stud in the buffer tube. I may eventually change out the buffer tube. I haven't fully decided yet, but I do want to get one of the PTS sling points here with the QD at some point. So when I do that, if I can find another buffer that'll fit this better, I may or may not decide to buy it. However, I've also considered, this is the weight that came in it initially, I've also considered getting this threaded out so that I could replace the cap on this, because this is a cap that comes off. So I've been thinking I might try to find a place that can thread this to fit on this and then just run it like that, because this is perfectly sized for this buffer tube. And the reason I want that is because, as I mentioned, that the buffer tube is too big. So this thing just does not stay in. It flies out every time I split the receivers. It just flies out. This stud that's meant to keep it in place does not hold it in place at all. Now in the trigger box internally, I'm going with this semi-auto sear from Guns Modify for the screw, which allows me to adjust the point where it sits so I can fine-tune the trigger a little bit more. This piece stays. I mentioned this earlier, but you need this if you want to keep the ambi release, which I do. So I am going to keep the valve knocker. This is also Guns Modify. This has an adjustment screw here that basically allows you to increase the tension on the trigger spring, which is why I'm going with this one. This is Guns Modify. I am going to keep this trigger just because this one felt better, but I did change the spring that goes on the trigger here from the one that came in the gun to this one because this one's a little bit heavier, so it gives a more crisp reset on the trigger. I am keeping this 2-stage, as you can see. So this piece came out of the Noveske trigger box because my MWS, my Guns Modified, did not have the 2-stage. It was a single stage. So this piece stays. It's from the Noveske. And then this piece is also out of my Guns Modify. They seem to be identical, but this one has that little cut in there. I don't really know what it's for, to be completely honest. It seems like it might just be a weight savings thing. But I'm going with the GM one instead of the Noveske one. The springs are mostly GM. I am using a lot of the GM springs. All of these came out of my Guns Modify. This one is out of the Noveske. This is for the single stage trigger, the single stage sear, or I'm sorry, the semi-auto sear. The reason I'm using this one is because I don't have one for the Guns Modify. So I'm keeping the semi-auto sear Noveske spring. Bolt catch, I'm going with the GM. I don't know that there's much of any difference. I'm just going with the GM because it's already worn in. Bath tag ZEP plate, I had this in my GM. The one that came on here seemed to have an issue catching the bolt whenever a magazine wasn't inside of it. Now I can catch the bolt no problem. So I'm going with the bath tag ZEP plate. On the upper, the Max hop unit, obviously. And I'm using a green LA Kappa Customs flat hop bucking. You can't see it, but there is a 300mm unicorn barrel. It comes out to about here, something like that. It's pretty long. That's why I have the suppressor, so I can cover it. But 300mm barrel. The suppressor extends with this hollow piece so that I can put a tracer in it. This cap comes off, and then it goes on here. I can drop a tracer into it. It's super nice. I was going to put a PTS grip, but the one that I had in my parts box downstairs, I apparently gave to a friend. I'm not going to ask for it back. And the only other thing I should mention when you're putting this back together is when this drops in, there's a screw that goes back here. Do not over tighten that screw. You don't even need to hand tighten it. You actually need to leave a little bit loose. So put a little bit of blue Loctite on the screw, on this screw that keeps it in place. And when you hit hand tight, back it out just a little bit. Otherwise, your mag release is going to be really tight. So I learned that from the myriad of times that I've taken this apart already, trying to find the best parts configuration. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there is a 140% bath tag spring in here. So this is literally just going to be me checking for bolt bounce. This thing is actually neat that it has the amber release because I can hold this here and shoot it. I'll slow down the video so that you can see whether or not it has any bolt bounce. But chrono with the Noveske, looking for no more than 280 FPS with 3.2s. Obviously, as the gas drops, you have less pressure, but also as you shoot, the mag cools down, which also leads to lower pressure. However, I'm pretty happy with where it's at. It's still pretty consistent. and it's under 1.2 joules, which is what I'm looking for. So this is almost now in its final configuration. I did make some changes since I recorded most of the other video. So I took out the LACC bucking, and I now have a MR Hop Maple Leaf bucking in here. The barrel is still the same, the hop unit's still the max unit. The PH Plus did not work with this. I don't know if that'll be applicable to every Noveske Ghetto Blaster or N4, but the PH Plus did not work in the one that I have. I changed the bolt roller. This one came off of my Guns Modify, and this little bearing here is actually the one that comes on the hammer for the original hammer that came out of this. I lost the bead that used to go on here, so I needed to improvise and find some other way to put a bearing on here. The bearing works to keep the bolt, the back end of the bolt roller, from contacting the top of the buffer tube, which also keeps it from being scratched up. Now the bottom is still being scratched up by that little stud on the back here. I did have to shim it down to see if I could prevent this from continuing to happen. It feels a lot smoother now. I can't obviously see it when it's closed up, but I'm assuming that it worked. This piece is supposed to push that pin down, but for whatever reason it doesn't push it down enough to keep it from scraping the bottom of the bolt roller. I did replace the Feta valve with the Jaeger Precisions valve. The Feta valve had issues maintaining its position, so it would come undone as I shot it. The Jaeger Precision holds its position a lot better. This bolt roller is actually not going to stay on here, and neither is the cap on the PTS mech. I picked up a set of T8 rollers, one for the cap and one for the bolt, that have, similar to this, it has little bearings on there. And what that cap will do is increase the diameter of this to fit better into the buffer, while hopefully also making it smoother on the travel. And then the last thing obviously is going to be that I'm going to buy that M130, I'm sorry, not M130, that 130% spring here to prevent the bolt bounce. Other than that, I really like the way it turned out. With the modifications that I made, I was able to completely remove all of the play that the trigger had, that pre-travel. So it feels a lot nicer to me now. It is a two-stage, so it does have two walls, so to speak. But if you remember earlier in the video, I had some pre-travel and now it is completely gone, and that's thanks to the Guns Modify adjustable pieces that I put in there. So it feels a lot nicer now. Honestly, I think I'm gonna like this thing. I think it's gonna be a ton of fun to play with, and I honestly can't wait to hit the field with it. Just a couple more notes. I mentioned earlier that this doesn't close. It looks like, when I was fidgeting with it, that ball that locks into the receiver is offset, so they don't actually line up properly, which is why this doesn't close. And also, it looks like this particular dust cover that they put on here is a little bit too big for the cutout of the dust cover on the upper receiver. The other thing that I really don't like is that the selectors are made out of plastic. So if I flip this over, you can see here where I damaged them a little bit while I was trying to pull them off, because they are on there pretty tight. So I tried to use some pliers to pull it off, and you can see that I damaged this. Keep in mind that if you are doing something inside the trigger box, you don't actually need to pull this one off. You only need to remove this side, and then you turn it about right there, and it should drop out pretty easily. So don't make the same mistake I did. Only take off the one on the right side. Other than that, I don't really have many complaints. I'll run it, I'll see how I feel about it, and if it warrants an update, I will give it. Last thing I keep forgetting to mention is that I did try a Guns Modify nozzle inside of this build. However, I was getting a misfeed where, for whatever reason, when the bolt would come forward, it would deflect upwards and end up like this, sitting on top of the feed lips and the BBs, without loading the BB into the chamber. It happened way too often for me to be okay with running it with the Guns Modify nozzle. So as far as I know, the Ghetto Blaster is incompatible with the Guns Modify nozzle. The Ditech nozzle that came in here had terrible compression, and it was consistently dropping FPS, which is why I didn't keep it. And that's the last thing I forgot, I promise. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.